So today we're going to be continuing to subtract fractions, but we're going to see what happens when we have to regroup today. So here we have 3 and 5/6 minus 1 and 1/6. So if we were to subtract this, we would start with our fractions. 5/6 minus 1/6. Well, 5 minus 1 is 4. And remember, our denominator stays the same. So 5/6 minus 1/6 is 4/6. And then 3 minus 1 is 2. So that's what we've learned so far. What happens, though, if we had to regroup? What would happen if we couldn't take 1 away from 5? If this bottom fraction were bigger, we would have to regroup, just like when we subtract. So in this situation, we have 126 minus 52. 6 minus 2 is 4. And when we get to 2 minus 5, well, we can't do that. We can't take 5 away from 2, right? So we're going to have to borrow here. So we borrow from the 1, and we make that 2 into a 12, right? And 12 minus 5 is 7, okay? And sometimes we have to do that when it comes to fractions. Like in this case, we have 3 1/3 minus 1 2/3. Well, we would start with the fractions, but we can't take 2 away from 1. It's too big, right? We can't take 2 from 1. 1 minus 2, we'd end up with a negative number. So again, we're going to have to borrow. We can actually borrow from this 3. So that 3 is going to become a 2. We borrowed 1. But we can't just add 1, right? Because 1 plus 1/3, that 1 doesn't equal, it just doesn't work for us. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to turn that whole into a fraction. And we're going to name that whole 3/3, right? Because 3/3 is the same as 1 whole. Just like 4/4 equals 1. 6/6 equals 1. 100 equals 1. All of these equal 1, right? So we're going to name that whole that we borrowed as the fraction with that same denominator so we can add it, right? What's 1/3 plus 3/3? Well, we end up with 4/3, right? Sorry, that's so funky looking for. We end up with 4/3. So now we have 4/3 minus 2/3. Now we can subtract. 4/3 minus 2/3 equals 2/3. 2 minus 1 equals 1. Okay, so I borrowed a whole, and then I named my whole as a fraction. Okay, let's look at another one. Here we have 4 1/6 minus 2 1/3. Well, you'll notice now we have two different denominators, right? So before we can do anything, we need a common denominator. What is the common denominator? Well, the least common multiple is 6. So we're going to change this to 4 and a 6. That stays the same. Minus 2 and something sixths. Well, 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. So now we have 4 and a 6 minus 2 and 2/6. But again, we can't take 2 away from 1. So we're going to have to borrow a whole, right? We can borrow here. This becomes a 3. And I'm going to add my whole in here. What should I name my whole? Should I name it 3/3 again? No, because now we've got sixths. So I'm actually going to name it 6/6. There's my whole. 1/6 plus 6/6 is 7/6, right? So I end up with actually 7/6, and we can get rid of that 1. We don't need that anymore. 7/6. 7/6 minus 2/6 is 5/6. 3 minus 2 is 1. All right. So borrow from your whole. Name that whole as a fraction that you can add here with a common denominator, and rename that fraction. Borrow it, subtract it, get your answer. All right. Try the problem of the day. I will see you in your teacher center.